Good morning. Thank you for joining us here at the AI House for our discussion today. My name is Neil MacDonald. I'm the Executive Vice President of Compute at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and I'm thrilled to be moderating this conversation this morning on solving scientific challenges with AI. And you're very lucky today because we have a very distinguished collection of speakers with us for our conversation today. Starting at the far end, we have Liviu Stirbat, who is the head of unit for AI and science at the European Commission. Then we have Joost VandeVondele, who is with the Swiss National Supercomputing Center, where he heads up research infrastructure engineering. We're also thrilled to be joined by Dr. Doug Arent, who is the Executive Director of Strategic Public-Private Partnerships at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in the USA. And last but by no means least, I'm thrilled to be joined by my colleague at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, Senior Vice President and Chief Product Officer for High Performance Computing and Artificial Intelligence, Trish Damkroger. Please join me in welcoming the panel. So our first question here is, it's hard this week not to be thinking about AI, because it's hard not to have the letters A and I in your line of sight as you walk along the promenade or you're anywhere at any event here at Davos this week. But as we think specifically about the impact of AI and get past kind of the hype and the fluff, I'd be interested in hearing from each of you on the panel of your thoughts to share how AI is currently being used, really used, for science research in your organization or in broader organizations that you support. And maybe share some examples of some of the progress and the impact you're seeing of AI accelerating progress in scientific research. And perhaps we could start with Liviu.
Thanks. I'll start off by thanking you for having me on the panel. It's a real pleasure to be here. Also to be able to sort of give back after a lot of learning that I have done here at the AI House. It's a great initiative, and it was really a source of inspiration for a lot of the work that we're currently doing at the EU. I also agree with your assessment. It was very hard not to have those two letters. But something that I wanted to start off with is sort of learning, the main learning that I take away, which is that I've heard a lot of very smart people this week mention AI applications in science as the most promising benefit that we're getting from it in this year, but also in the following decade. And so you're not hearing it just from a bureaucrat working for the EU, but also we've heard it on the same panel from the president of the EPFL. I've heard the president of the chair of the board of MIT, and a lot of politicians as well have made and passed this message. We at the EU are priding ourselves for setting the stage for a lot of regulation in AI. We're banking on the so-called Brussels effect, trying to get other jurisdictions to follow suit. We've done a lot of thinking. We're one of the earliest, if not the first, to really regulate with the AI Act. But we're also priding ourselves in being among the leaders in applications, and science is one domain where we're also quite early on. In terms of examples, there's a host of them, and we'll hear others as well, but for sure, what matters for us as policymakers, but also as research funders, is to make sure that the researchers themselves are well equipped for a good take-up of this new promising technology. We have a lot of early adopters, and in some of the scientific disciplines that are more mature in terms of data. There's a lot of scientific disciplines that have computational added to them, computational biology, computational chemistry. Those are really ripe for a lot of advancements, and they have really driven some of the research. But we're seeing this permeate throughout the scientific world, from domains like political sciences, anthropology, cosmology, but also volcanology, even like domains that you wouldn't necessarily think of or even associate with AI are seeing take up. And our job is really to make sure that this technology goes to the ones that need it, that they are making the best use of it. We, as I said, as public funders, we have a duty to our citizens and taxpayers to make sure that the research we're funding is the best and is the most effective and most efficient. So that's why we see a lot of promise here, and that's why we have this sort of dedicated department with a lot of initiatives going towards that.
Thanks a lot, Liviu. And of course, one of the places that's very active in this space is CSCS. So, Joost, perhaps you can share your perspective on the impact that you're seeing and how AI is getting used by the researchers you support.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Yes, indeed. So CSCS enables computational science in Switzerland and in Europe. We are building infrastructure that's really suitable for that. And I must say that we have been seeing applications of AI already for many years. So scientists have, had this notion, the data that's very valuable, the insights that can be gained by AI. But now recently, with the foundational models, the generative AI, this has seen an incredibly large surge. Basically, in all sciences, we see scientists very hungry to apply the methods and the tools that AI provides. And we have great examples, for example, in material science, where people will predict new materials, new properties of these materials based on AI. We will have applications, and one of the topics that is big at CSCS is the domain of weather and climate, where we actually combine both simulation data at very large scale with experimental data. So we work together with, for example, the Swiss National Weather Service or the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecast. And we combine this data to extract more accurate weather forecasts or make, for example, things like the prediction of extreme events possible, have ensembles that are much more, at the one hand, right now more even accurately computed with AI, but also that are much more cheaply and thus much more convenient to do a large number of simulations. So that is something we see as well. Now, if we come to the generative AI that we have today, one thing, and it will also be announced later today, is that we've partnered up with, for example, all scientists in Switzerland, basically to create what we call the Swiss AI Initiative, that will use the infrastructure we provide to train, for example, large language models or multimodal models in that domain. That will then have an impact in various areas. There are like verticals on robotics to combine that with vision. There are pillars that work on medical, that will use medical data to improve, for example, how decisions are made in hospitals. We will have a pillar on climate and so on. So it's really across all domains of science, we see right now a huge impact and also a great interest by scientists.
Thank you. And Doug, when you think in the area of focus of the National Renewable Energy Lab, how are you seeing AI impact the science that you're doing or you're supporting your partners to do?
Actually, let me start with a little bit of what NREL is. So it's a Department of Energy National Laboratory, 47 years old, focused on energy efficiency and renewables. But what that covers is not just wind, solar, it covers batteries, electric vehicles, biosciences, biofuels, and innovation on computing in partnership with HPE and other things. So we've been in this space, and so we focus on energy and climate mitigation, adaptation, resiliency. And so let me give you a couple of really tangible examples, actually building off the climate and predictability. One of the most interesting things from an energy perspective is we all appreciate the lights on. We would like them to stay on for a long period of time. And of course, we want our energy system to be decarbonized. But today, all energy planning is done with historical data sets. However, we know from climate modeling that we have ensembles of possible futures with very, sorry, I'm just going to be nerdy here, fat tail distributions, right, of extreme events. Okay, good. I see some nods. Good. And what we're able to do now with AI-enabled capabilities is actually look at those ensembles of future possibilities and bring them back into energy planning. And so now we can actually think about what the possibilities of, lack of a better way, I'll call it weather, will look like in 2075 under different climate scenarios, and resiliently plan or look for resilient options in energy systems. That's one. Second one might be, you've heard a lot about, again, on the energy and climate side, carbon capture and storage. Storage is underground storage. Maybe it's the same thing about thinking about exploiting geothermal energy technologies. That's underground heat. AI is enabling incredible amounts of the ability to characterize the underground resources, which we never had before. And then you've got everything in materials as well, or specific applications that might be about understanding what the potential is for a grid to operate on what are called inverter-based resources. So think of wind and solar, right? That's a new paradigm for most power system operators, but we use AI in order to both develop those capabilities in power electronics and in the computing, but then in the controls as well. So a number of, I call them tangible applications on that front. And then we get all the way into the biosciences as well. And so that covers everything that might extend into what you might think of as pharmaceuticals. We use biosciences for thinking about biomass or using hydrogen, clean carbon, maybe nitrogen that comes from the air, and creating low carbon chemicals and fuels. So AI plays all in that space as well. New catalysts, new biology of materials as well. A whole gamut.
That's an amazing range of work, and thank you for the really concrete examples for our audience here today. Now Trish, in your work in supercomputing, you're working with organizations all over the world in every corner of computational science. So you're in a position to have a very broad perspective of some of the ways that AI is now being deployed in scientific research. Can you share some insights and some examples?
Sure. So thank you all for attending. I have been part of high performance computing for way too long. So we won't need to go for how many decades, but I think it's such an exciting time because we've realized now that supercomputing is the foundation needed to run AI. And we finally have the data available and the compute power to make that difference and really start solving some of the problems that we have not been able to tackle, honestly, until now. So some examples, and I think first, just looking at where our supercomputers are placed. I think LUMI, which is the largest supercomputer in Europe, which I know you're very well aware of, you talk to them, I think they're surprised that 50% of the work done on LUMI today is artificial intelligence. That has been a huge shift over the last year. Frontier, which is the most powerful supercomputer in the world at Oak Ridge National Lab, they now are they can use 10% of their GPUs to run a trillion parameter model, large language model. So we're starting to actually have the convergence between HPC and AI. The applications that I get super excited about, I mean, I love the idea, and I think COVID was one of the great examples is when we needed to come up with a vaccine and how AI helped accelerate the discovery of what were the possible combinations to bring a vaccine as early as possible to the public. And we're going to continue to see that with different drug discovery. And so I think that is an amazing opportunity for all of us and humanity and hopefully to get to precision medicine. But I love the idea of new batteries, new materials that are really necessary for us. And energy. I think energy is going to be a scarce resource we're already seeing. And I think we need all the capabilities we can to solve some of these grand challenges we have.
So the technology is pervasive. It's either impacting or has the potential to impact all forms of computational research. But I'm interested in hearing from each of you, from your perspective, what is the biggest scientific research challenge that you think we still have to solve, that you think AI is going to help us crack? And how do you think AI helps us get there? So who wants to go first? No, we're gonna shake it up. Liviu went first the last time. We got to share the wealth here. Joost?
Good, thank you. So I'm going to take the challenge. So we have, as I explained, many directions, but one very important focus for us is climate prediction and mitigation of the risk of climate change. And that's where we are trying to invest in good AI and to move that forward to also work in a very focused way in combining what we call much more traditional approach to climate prediction, so simulation-based results with observational data. And I think this is where we will see great impact with a huge societal impact as well. If we can predict now where there will be floods in the future, where there will be droughts, how kind of new cities will be built. I think this is very important. It's also a field where we as infrastructure providers actually can learn a lot. That community has a decade-long experience both with handling very large amounts of data. If you say, give me a petabyte of data, the climate scientist will not blink. They have that ready. They know how to deal with the compute and how to work on this integration. So for this is a very valuable field to move towards truly big data and machine learning. And I think that's what we will do in the near future.
I can give some examples. I was struck by the scale of the challenge you threw at us, the greatest scientific challenges. So I'll steer with some examples away from the energy side, because I think that will be very well covered. To mention...
Thank you.
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be.
I have a feeling. Healthcare and medical imaging and personalized medicine, that's really something that we're seeing a lot of promise and a lot of potential. And it's also a domain that's historically been at ease with large amounts of data. They know how to handle personal data, privacy issues, so that there's a springboard for developments in this area in Europe, but I think globally as a whole as well. And I'll also mention, we talked a lot about infrastructure. There's a lot of data that needs to be fed into these models so that you get the benefits out of it. And here as well, we, from the European Union side, we're pushing a lot of data spaces. The health data space is the most advanced one, but we also have, we're preparing to connect infrastructure and data in the space of manufacturing and industrial data. And there's a lot of promise there as well with research into, we've heard new materials, but also supply chain and all sorts of scientific breakthroughs, again, in areas that you don't necessarily think about. And I'll close off with a personal favorite, because I have an astrophysics background. It may not be the greatest challenge, but it's certainly exciting to think about space in cosmology and black hole imaging. There's a lot that AI is doing right now. So it's really something to inspire and keep us challenged and motivated, in addition to all of the other energy things. And fusion as well. I'm not sure you'll talk about fusion, but fusion research and ITER, there's a lot of data and a lot of potential and a lot of promise already from AI and how to handle the tokamaks and the hot fusion and so on. Thanks.
All right, Doug.
All right. I get to be practical.
Let me reiterate the question. Which one greatest scientific challenge?
So it's kind of fun when he says one, right? So what do I get to do? I get to take my hat for energy, my hat having worked in energy-water nexus, my hat working as a climate scientist, and my hat working in geopolitics, and then all the other pieces. And so I'll be very practical. It is about the design of and the investment pathways to create a resilient, low-carbon energy economy for our future, because that is the basis of all of our productivity in life. And that's not just here, it's across Africa, it's across Asia, it's for the world. And it needs the best climate science. And I would say the complement is really about personal optimized medicine as well. But for me, that energy, water, climate nexus is the one greatest challenge. And there's all sorts of pieces, and I can I can talk about exascale data sets and what we do as examples, but we'll get to that at some other time. But that's my one challenge. It's pulling it all together. And so maybe it's not about a solar panel, and it's not about a wind turbine or a fusion reactor. It's about the integrated energy economy climate system. And we need AI to solve that one. It's an integrated one problem.
It's a good one.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks, Doug.
Can I geek out?
Of course you can.
I mean, that's my
I'm
favorite
pretty
thing.
sure, given the title of this session, if there's any room in the whole town this week that it's safe to geek out at, this is probably it. So go
Okay.
for it.
So we are at AI House. So I get super excited. I also came from Lawrence Livermore National Labs, and they're using fusion energy. So let me just go on. One of the things that they have last year, they showed that they were successful in getting more energy out than in. And it started with AI. So when I was there, they were using a cylindrical pellet to focus 192 lasers down into this pellet, right? And it was completely spherical, and it wasn't working. I mean, they were not getting more energy out. So they used AI to do some data modeling, and they realized that it was the wrong shape. They changed the shape, and it's been successful. So now we're delivering El Capitan right now to Lawrence Livermore, and they're going to be using what could be the world's most powerful supercomputer to do cognitive simulation. So that's actually using AI to drive the simulation so that they can learn as they go. And so it's going to be a completely full loop process. And I'm super excited because we need fusion energy. That means we can get energy out of H2O water. So an ultimate source of renewable energy.
So there's an example where AI is being leveraged to actually drive the iterative application of the scientific method and drive the simulations and the modeling that's been done, rather than having a human in the loop in those steps.
Exactly. It will be I think, the first that at least I know of.
Incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
So one of the great things about being here this week is we have such a multidisciplinary, multi-sector audience. So I'm going to change tack a little bit and ask you, as you think about all of these growing applications of AI in science, where do you see the commercial sector advancing R&D to accelerate the innovation? And how's that going to play into national competitiveness and enable growth and the creation of social and economic value? Why don't you start, Doug? I think you've got a pretty good perspective on this.
Keep walking down. All right, let me start with the partner example, just to speak to our own partnership. So at NREL, we have a small 44 petaflop supercomputer. It didn't start that size. It started actually smaller, but we're a bunch of energy nerds, right? We wanted, of course, the world's most energy efficient supercomputer and data center. So we co-designed actually components which have now become the basis for your commercial supercomputing whole program, which most people wouldn't ever think about. Because what did we do? We said, what does an integrated system that's super energy efficient look like and provide compute power? All compute before this innovation, I think all compute, if it's a fair statement, was air-cooled, right? Air-cooled comes from huge air conditioners, et cetera. What's this one? It mixes oil and water. We actually put water cooling on the boards. And people were like going, oh, no, that's too risky, et cetera. So no, it's not. It's like I was sitting at a dinner last night and somebody said, it's impossible to create low-carbon glass. And I said, oh, I love that challenge. Please, just bring it on. But to national competitiveness, let me take that example, because that's exactly what we do. It's what the national labs do. It's what supercomputing centers do, is to work with commercial partners to bring innovation to bear and let the commercial partner take it and make a commercial business out of it. That supports national competitiveness, and you then apply it to supply chains and everything else on there. But it's really about those innovative partnerships and having the orientation to be strategic partners, not just tactical partners. And for us also as a national lab, our mission is to support commercial opportunity, innovate in that clean energy space, work with partners to commercialize it. We have 1,000 of them. Only one compute partner, though. 1,000 other partners across that whole landscape of biology, chemistry, et cetera. And that's super exciting for us because we're not a commercializing operation. So, good example.
Great context. How would you compare and contrast CSCS, Joost?
Yeah, so that was a very interesting question. So as a academic center, we do support commercial operations, but to a much lesser extent. So for us right now, the pathway is, for example, to support startups in the early phase, make it possible. And we see, of course, that there is a lot of uptake of AI. So this is clearly a domain where a lot of startups get created. I think that most commercial entities actually see the value and the applicability of AI. It's a very practical technology. You can try to solve a problem today, and tomorrow you might be able to implement it essentially on the market. And that, I think, is one of the unique things. Now, I think in Switzerland is well known for the services it provides. Trustworthy banks and so on is one of the things you might think about. And I think for the technology, AI as a whole, the trustworthiness of the technology will be key. Can people rely on AI services from a company, from somebody else? And I think this might be one element where academia can work well together with the private sector to actually try and enhance the trustworthy nature of AI. And that's one of the goals we have with the Swiss AI initiative. But I think this is something where we have to understand, what does it mean? When does AI become trustworthy? We had a discussion before that was very interesting. Does it mean that the data should be open or not? It's not possible in all domains. What does it mean about the models? We have to understand how these technologies truly work. Right now, they work to a large extent as a good recipe. We don't have, we're still missing a lot of fundamental understanding that will help to bring the trust. And I think that's where I see very powerful collaborations between, the private sector, commercial entities, and academic sectors.
That's a great perspective. Thank you, Joost. Trish, you're kind of in the other direction as a commercial business leader, as well as a scientist and a product owner, working with public sector. Can you share some color with the audience about how critically you see those collaborations, and what is it about the collaborations that are most impactful in helping you accelerate your impact in the market and your competitiveness?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to give a little historical perspective, because I started by saying that we now can tackle AI because we have the compute power and the data. And the relationships that we've had over the last decade with the Department of Energy and other nationalities is why I believe we have that compute power today. So I think that we need to continue to make sure that we have strong public and private partnerships, because that is going to be how we accelerate our understanding of AI and the implementation. I know that I was in a breakfast just this morning, and a lot of our supply chain, which is so critical. I mean, when we can talk about the geopolitics of the world, right? And how they are using supercomputing and AI to streamline just the supply chain for our national defense. So I think it's just become now this integral part of how nations are viewing national security and the need for AI and supercomputing. But then also, I think it's a joint. We have to work together to make sure that we take it forward in a responsible and sustainable way.
Thanks, Trish. Now, Liviu, this all has implications when you think about policy. And you're in a wonderful position to reflect for our audience here on what policy decisions need to be made to facilitate that collaboration between the public and the private sector in this space. And how are you thinking about that at the Commission?
It's really top of mind for us. The way we fund research in general in the EU is really focused on collaboration. It's really 10% of the overall funding for research in the EU is, so 90% is the countries, the member states, and 10% is the layer on top, the federal layer, if you will. So we're trying to get the most out of this 10% by getting collaborations out there between countries, between sectors, between disciplines, really about multidisciplinarity. So for us, it comes natural that we get the domain scientists to work with the AI scientists to get this kind of research going. And it also comes natural that we get the public sector and the private sector going. In a lot of the consortia that we fund, there are requirements for private sector participation, and similarly for the AI research projects. And at the same time, we at the EU level are also supporting startups to build on Joost's example. We have a venture capital arm that's disappointingly the largest one in Europe right now is public sector funding. It's called the European Innovation Council. We fund a lot of great startups, and some of them on AI are at the AI House this week. But I wanted to close a bit coming back to autonomy and strategic autonomy, which is something that is really also top of mind for us at the EU level. And that links to how we see the geopolitics of AI and science. We've done some bibliometrics looking at publications and affiliations of researchers, and we found, as expected, a sort of massive growth. And we're really talking about AI in science, so not research into the development of AI itself, but applications. And in addition to the growth that's really spectacular, the country distribution is really interesting. We see the EU sort of eking out ahead of the US a bit, but then we see China more than basically almost the two of them put together. And that is a sort of indication. We've spoken to some Chinese scientists and also some China experts. It is a way to leapfrog to the front of the excellence in science. And they see this as an opportunity, and that's an opportunity we cannot afford to miss either. So it's a sort of friendly competition that will benefit the world. We have all these breakthroughs that will be enabled by this kind of AI-powered research, but we need to stay in the game. Thanks.
So building on that thread, if we've got a need for collaboration, an opportunity for collaboration between the private and the public sector in AI, what kind of role should they be playing together to fuel AI innovation? And how can that partnership make AI accessible? Because some of the AI that we're talking about here is some of the most energy and talent consuming technology that the world has ever seen. It can have barriers to access that are economic. It can have barriers to access that are skills limited. There are so many things that can stand in the way of marshalling all of the scientific talent and enabling that talent to all be leapfrogging so that science as a whole is accelerating its progress. So how do you see private and public sector priorities in working together to expand that accessibility of AI technologies beyond what Joost talked about earlier about, you know, the work in supporting the portfolio of researchers? I know you have a perspective on that. Go for it, Doug.
I mean, again, maybe I'll be just practical here in some sense. So we think about the now application of large language models, and our organization as one produces 1,000 reports every year. Not even our researchers know everything that's going on. And so what we're trying to do is train a large language model on just our small little data set, but that's really helpful because then you don't know what you don't know, but the LLM actually helps you know what you don't know. And then also for the outside world as well. And so it's a very interesting application of how do you just gain knowledge, much like on the science side that was just said, like you're going to leapfrog ahead because you can mine the database essentially and ask what was history, what's cutting edge, and how do we advance it going forward? And That's just in a very practical example. I would say the other piece is offering that to, frankly, the public, right? So we're developing public-facing search engines that are LLM behind it, that are available to anybody who wants to come and ask a question. That they never had that possibility. They would have to go to the library, search on keywords, and it was cumbersome. And I don't know if you've ever tried to probe a national lab website, or frankly a large corporation website, welcome to it, right? So, I mean, there's practicality there in terms of the public-private partnership, but that's about building trust. It's also about expanding knowledge to the public so that they also feel included or capable, if they're so interested, in learning and being part of the journey rather than being a subject of the journey, if I can use that. Yeah. So it gets a little softer, but there's one of the biggest issues on this energy and climate challenge, I'm going to put a challenge out there. AI, and I've not had a conversation yet about this, is one of the biggest energy consuming sectors, and we have to solve that, right? So we need even smarter AI that doesn't have to go out and search the whole database of the web each time it needs to learn, right? We can't do that for every single problem because we don't have enough energy to support that and support clean fuels, clean mobility, et cetera, et cetera. So we need AI to solve AI's energy problem. Frankly, there's a challenge for everybody in the room because that's not, we'll help you with that one. But that's a big one to go forward. So
I really liked your example there of thinking about accessibility not to AI, but using AI to address an accessibility to knowledge that's there and making it more easily consumable. First of all, inside your own four walls, but broadly into the community and then to the public. That's a great example. Trish, what would you say?
Well, so I mean, just to build on what you said is, yes, AI, $100 million, megawatts to solve a problem, and that's just not sustainable. So I do believe there is a great opportunity for joint research to get some of those next steps. I can see an evolutionary approach that maybe can help us get, a scale maybe 50% better, but I think it's going to be hardcore research, maybe energy-based models or other kinds of research to really make a difference and make sustainable AI, which will mean that we can actually make it accessible and democratize AI. Because right now it's going to be held in those people that have the resources and the compute power.
And there's a huge opportunity there that's largely untapped about how do we tackle the software to make it less consumptive. I think a lot of people focus on what do you do with the hardware, what do you do with the computer architecture, how do you power it, how do you cool it? But there's a whole stack here that needs to be tackled collaboratively in order to reduce the energy footprint of the computation itself, right? So Joost, what would you add?
Yeah, so I want to stay in the practical part of the question. All answers have been very practical. One thing we have to realize is how resource-intensive, contemporary AI is. The infrastructure you need to train AI today is very large. And I think scientists are at the risk of, missing access to this kind of infrastructures. And for me, a very practical collaboration was the collaboration we had with our vendors that decided to give, basically hardware access or hardware or sell this hardware to academia. And I think this is something that is not at all obvious that, this kind of relationships work because there's huge commercial pressure, I'm sure, on these companies to deliver to the handful of big players who gets the GPUs for training today. And I think this is a very valuable collaboration we've had, collaboration that we've nurtured over the years, and that results in early access for scientists to what I would think is going to be, top hardware. And I think this is very important that we don't limit to a very small fraction of the big players the access to the hardware. So this is one point I think is very important. Now, the other key thing, and it actually might even touch a little bit on your software question, is we have to educate the people. I mean, I come from an educational institution. We have to educate the people to be able to work with these large language models, to see what are the best practices. And I think this is also an area where academia and the private sector has vastly different experiences, and where there's huge value in collaborating. We should learn the best practices from one area. How do we deploy models? How do we operationalize the training of models? And the other aspect is how can we do the research needed to make the software stack on top of the hardware, as effective as possible. Why do we need these models with billions of parameters? Why do we need this extremely large amounts of data? This is not understood yet, and I think when we make progress towards that, we can easily improve energy efficiency of ML by a factor 10 or whatever is feasible in a short time span. So I think these are two areas.
Great perspective. Thank you, Joost. Liviu, when you think about accessibility of AI, and you think of the science community that you represent specifically, what are the biggest challenges that you see in accessibility, and how does the Commission tackle that moving forward?
Thanks. It's really something that we're very concerned with. But before I tackle the sort of human dimension, which I think is very important here, I just wanted to mention, I think Trish gave the example of Lumi, which is a supercomputer in Finland, currently the fastest one in Europe, and I think 5th overall. They pride themselves for being 100% hydropower, and they use the excess heat, they plug it into district heating. So it's a sort of closed loop that shows that there are ways to do it well in terms of that. And I think it was on this panel, somebody was talking in the sustainability session about turning these data centers from basically hair dryers into power plants. That's the sort of challenge there. For accessibility and policymakers, it's really important that we avoid a widening of the gap that currently exists in the scientific field between universities, between countries, because the ideas and the knowledge and the genius is everywhere. We have that challenge already now. Certain countries are faring better than others, but we see that the injection of AI into science is basically turbocharging that. And you will see the ones who are not doing well getting left behind, whereas the others are excelling. And again, it's a wasted opportunity. There's talent everywhere. So just as sort of anecdotes to be pragmatic, we've seen also gender differences in the take-up of AI in science. We see female scientists being more reluctant to play with it. It might be a sort of macho kind of thing, like we play with data, it's sort of cool, male kind of thing. We don't yet know why. We've also seen that universities that have strong AI departments in computer science do better at AI in science, because basically if you're a linguist, you can just cross the street and partner up with a scientist there. And I'll close also on accessibility in private sector and the interplay between the public and the private. We're currently seeing through the AI boom a lot of sort of magnetism for the AI talent into the private sector. And that leaves behind a lot of science that could be developed. It's hard to compete right now with the rates that you can get working as an AI scientist in the private sector. So that's why, to go back to your question initially, partnering is important, because it might be that the resources are not squarely on one side or the other. You need both of them. And that's why we need to partner. Public-private partnerships are key right now. Thanks.
Great. Thank you all. Now, we have a little bit of time. We have an incredible opportunity here, because this is a really, really distinguished convening that we have up here with these four experts. So is there anybody out in the audience that has a question they'd like to ask? If you want to wait for the mic, if you can pass that back, please, Kirk.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Antonella Santuccione-Ciada. I am the Chief Medical Officer of a AI-powered, let's say, diagnostic company that discriminates cognitive functioning based on a machine learning model. But I'm also the founder and the CEO of the Women's Brain Project. And I'm glad that finally we spoke the big elephant in the room, which is gender. I mean, I think that if you feel what your body feels, climate change, we all have it in this room, right? It's obvious. But if you use your eyes and turn around and you look who sits in this room, majority it is men, majority it is white skin. And, I want to ask how you, within your organization, are solving and addressing this issue. The other question I have is about data sharing and GDPR. I mean, regulation in Europe are making a nightmare to power, basically, what we discover in terms of innovation in this part of the world, such as that whatever we do serves first United States and then us European citizens, most of the time. I worked as a regulator for the Swissmedic here, and I know what I'm talking about.
All right, so let's take the first one first, and then see if we've got time to come back to it. Because I know we could talk forever, but we do have limited time today, and I want to make sure we can get another question. I think there's another question down the front if we can get ready for that.
If I may say, 50% gender balance between male and female in just on the seated side.
Okay, so let's start with the first part of that question. Who wants to weigh in? Yeah, the gender balance question.
So I'll actually be broader than that. So we have a whole diversity, equity, inclusive practice at our laboratory. We support multiple what are called employee resource groups. So there's a women's group, there's a colored person's group, there's an international group, et cetera. That's about building community. And then maybe more importantly from our side, we run technical assistance programs. So we engage with communities, countries. We work in about 40 countries around the world. We work in thousands of communities. And all of that is based upon inclusive processes to work forward on what we do, which is clean energy planning and implementation. And it's really about listening is where you start, because most communities don't come from an energy perspective. They come from air, education, food, water, transport, communications, et cetera. Energy is just an enabler of all of that. And so we have to understand what's most important. And much of that, particularly in the developing countries, low and middle income countries where we work, is about women and food and water and education. And so we're very sensitive to what that is, and it's kind of in the core of how we engage with communities and how we embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workforce.
So as the woman on the panel, but I think it's two-pronged. And one, I mean, I'm very involved in women in STEM, getting people into the pipeline, and you've got to start early, as we know. I mean, we've been working on this for the last 20, 30 years, ever since I've been in the pipeline and the only woman in the room most of my career. But the thing that I found in the last couple of years, it's up to me too, to sponsor. We in the leadership have to be pulling up the women. And as more of us get up to that leadership, it's more of our responsibility to do. So I really think it's two-pronged. It's easy to point, the finger at others, and I've decided I need to take some responsibility myself. And I think that's the way we're going to make an impact more than women. We need all diversity, because diverse thoughts is what the world is. I mean, you look at Africa is going to be, what did they say, a third of the population by 2030. We have to figure this out.
So maybe we can touch on the second part of the question, and then we'll come to our final question here in the front. And the question was really around policy around data and data sharing, which of course is super impactful in the scientific community above all. So I think probably Liviu, you're the best person to speak to that.
Yeah, maybe I take 2 seconds to reply to the first part as well. We take gender very importantly in EU funding for research, and we have an obligation for beneficiaries to have a gender action plan. So it's really trying to get the community there, not just participation, but also gendered research, especially in the medical field. There's a lot of research that is purely based on male models of the body and so on. So we're trying to tackle that as well. In terms of data, you're not going to be surprised. I'm going to defend the model. I think history will prove us right, and it's starting to show signs that privacy is globally becoming of concern, and we in Europe are very well placed for that. But we're trying to offer mitigating measures for that as well through the data spaces I mentioned. We have a European open science cloud that is basically a giant data space for all of the data produced by the research we fund. And it has ways of dealing with GDPR, it's GDPR compliant. So we're trying to help the scientists as well. I think that's, I was just in a panel the other day listening to Tim Berners-Lee, who was coming up with some brilliant ideas on how to regain control over our own data. And again, I think Europe is well placed to lead that. Thanks.
One more question at the front.
Yeah, hi. So energy is a very powerful tool between countries. So I was wondering, do you see some conflicts of interest where it can go against the advances of AI in energy, like democratization of energy, like smart grids, etc.?
Yeah, super simple. Yes, absolutely. So AI, it's both an enabler, but it's also a threat vector. So we have a whole cybersecurity program to think about. And when you think about the Internet of Energy things, so think of your smart home, right? Your refrigerator's connected, your home energy management system's connected, all the power grid is connected, and a communication layer. So AI becomes a potential serious threat in terms of understanding and how to manage grids, and particularly multi-border grids. And so, as one thinks about, I'll call it the global or even regional energy systems are very interconnected in terms of supply and demand. And so that's oil that goes back and forth, natural gas, of course. Think of Russia, Ukraine, and the whole European system. And then there's a very fine balance in thinking about interconnected electricity grids, because there's a benefit to doing that. It helps you access cheaper resources, so think North Africa to Europe, or across pan-European from the north to the south, or in America, east-west, north-south, et cetera. It also then introduces vulnerability. And so AI both helps you manage that, i.e. the smartness, but it also opens up the vulnerability. And so I think we need to be really mindful in terms of where we go. We also need to have standards and controls put in place. So I look to the policymakers to help guide, not mandate, but guide where we need to go. And then we need to be really diligent in terms of how do we commercialize. So.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks for your questions. Just to wrap, and we didn't prep this, so buckle up, okay? We talk about having great talent up here, but the wonderful thing about being in Davos this week is we have a room full of amazing talent. For each of you on the panel, in one concise sentence, what's the thought or the action that you would have the audience take away on this journey of applying AI to science and accelerating how we solve the world's biggest problems?
I have a super simple one. I'm going to dive in.
I'll dive in. I see a lot of people working in AI today who are seduced by the most complicated ways of solving problems. I think part of this journey for us is not using a sledgehammer to crack a nut and picking the right tool for the right job, and not trying to use generative AI everywhere for everything. That would be mine.
That's a good one. I'll go super quickly. Seek uncommon partnerships. Reach across. Don't keep talking to your peer group and your choir. Reach out to others.
Wow, the one thing I think for me, it's continuing to make sure that we all use your network, like you kind of said, and think outside the box. So Doug, I agree with you. We seem to get so focused and just our heads down, and I think that we're going to advance AI by bringing in more voices.
I'm going to say, embrace curiosity and courage. So, explore what is possible and, see what this technology can do for you for something very interesting.
Great one. Final word, Liviu.
I'll use a possibly copyrighted PR thing. Just do it.
Well, thank you all very, very much for your time and your insights with the audience. And please join with me in thanking the panel for the contributions today. And thank you to all of you for investing your time with us here today. I hope this has been an insightful and thought-provoking conversation for you. And you have the opportunity to continue that with our speakers here as we wrap the session and move on. Thanks for being with us, and thanks for being with us here at the AI House.